Hi. So I just wanted to talk about a little bit about the $15 minimum wage and the fight for 15 that's going on in the USA at the moment. And I guess more broadly, just talk about the range. It's a really interesting thing going on where we can actually see now with the rise of Bernie Sanders, we can really see, really get a solid glimpse of the spectrum of people who are liberal. And it's really interesting seeing the progressive debates about each of the policies and where everyone stands and and pragmatism versus idealism and all these kinds of things. And one of the interesting things is the fight for 15. And fascinating to me is watching people who are very liberal and progressive and but not the most liberal. So we get into Democrat voters, but the more conservative types, and they start using arguments that, in my mind, I would always associate with Republicans or conservative types, and that is caring about having a real emphasis on businesses and a sudden worriment about how businesses will be able to survive. And the Fight for 15 is a great example of this. And there's this big argument now within liberal circles of 15 across the nation, which appears to be what the Democratic Party have adopted, and $15 in the major cities and $12 in areas with lower cost of living. So this idea that the minimum wage should be attached to cost of living. And the idea is that smaller businesses or areas with more sparsely populated with less money can't afford to pay a larger wage, a $15 wage, and you don't need a $15 wage because $12 is enough to live in these areas. And it actually sounds, I mean, that's a conservative argument, the way I hear it. That's the same argument used against raising the minimum wage at all, in that businesses will start firing people, businesses won't be able to hire people if we raise the minimum wage from $7.25 or have any minimum wage. If you go to the extreme right, you say minimum wage is too much as it is. We need to compete with overseas, etc., etc. Only the line of minimum wage has been sort of arbitrarily shifted, or maybe not arbitrarily. It might be, according to inflation, and that's different depending on how you adjust for inflation and productivity and all these kinds of things. There's different bars of $11.22 versus $21, et cetera, of what minimum wage should be compared to what it was years ago. And so the less left of the liberals are really clinging to this idea that $15 is fine for the cities in which the average wage is already higher, but in the smaller cities, $12 is much more sustainable. And I find it interesting. Well, I'm from Australia, obviously, and here we have a minimum wage, which I probably should have done research before I did this video, but my guess is it's around $15, and it scales up with age. So the older you get, the lower the minimum wage. So my guess is it's probably around $18 for an 18-year-old, and it starts at around about $15. But my point is, why is $12 the low bar here that some liberals are aiming for? Why are they saying, okay, $15 is fine in the bigger cities where they're going to earn more anyway, but in the smaller cities, $12 is fine. That's the living wage that we want to aim for. Why isn't $15 considered the low bar already? Why do we think that's such a huge leap? I know it's a massive jump from $7.25. It's a huge increase in minimum wage, but if people are going to be earning average wages in cities higher already, why aren't we looking at $15 as the low bar and say, okay, $15 is fine for the smaller cities, but higher than that should be expected in the larger cities? It's just this kind of, it's the way we look at these things that is kind of interesting to me. So the people who think it's a big leap say that's fine for the big cities, but smaller cities, smaller. It should be smaller. Whereas the other people say $15 is the minimum, and in the big cities, you should try to earn more. It's how you view that $15 mark, which is most interesting to me. So I think it should be 15 across the board. And living in Australia, um, where cost of living is higher, and part of that is due to uh, the higher minimum wage, of course, but there's another thing here as well, and it's only factoring in cost of living. So it depends on how much people think you should be earning on minimum wage, how comfortable you should be, and whether you should be able to live a comfortable life. But if you're an unskilled worker in Australia, $15 an hour, it will give you a pretty decent life. And there are all kinds of social safety nets in place and universal health care to give someone a higher quality life if they're working minimum wage for their whole life, or later in their life, to sustain a living. But also think about what else it allows you to do. You can then use those high value dollars to travel overseas, and you can go somewhere like, for Australia, Bali, or somewhere with a low cost of living, and you can spend that money and have a more enjoyable time as well. So I know people recently who traveled through America, and they traveled through the United States of America, and they traveled through the southern states, and most of the people they met in the smaller towns were astounded that they could just quit their jobs for a few months and travel, even though they didn't have such highly specialized, highly skilled, high paying jobs. They just had normal jobs, and they saved their money and they quit and they traveled for months, and they had one of the best times of their lives. And I think with minimum wages, we shouldn't just be aiming to give people the bare minimum to survive, to encourage them to upskill and mobilize. I mean, we should be encouraging people to have, we should be paying people to have dignity in their lives. And I think $15 is the first step towards that. $15 and increasing social safety nets. And that will give people the mobility they need to upskill and to educate themselves and to live a good life with dignity. So that's how I see that.